Imagine waking up to find construction crews tearing up your property, building something you never approved. That's exactly what happened to me, a 58-year-old homeowner, when the Oakridge HOA built a fully functioning public restroom on my front corner property without my permission. I confronted them in rage as strangers casually walked in and out of these facilities using my land as a public convenience. What they didn't know was about to turn their scheme into their worst nightmare. After 30 years as a city health inspector, I was looking forward to enjoying my retirement in peace. Oakridge Estates seemed like the perfect community when I purchased my corner lot 3 years ago. The property was prime real estate, beautiful landscaping, excellent road access, and backing up to protected woodland that gave me the privacy I'd always wanted. What I didn't fully appreciate at the time was the property's strategic location. My corner lot sits at the intersection of our upscale residential community and the entrance to Eagle Ridge Trail, one of the most popular hiking destinations in the county. On weekends, the trail attracts thousands of tourists who come to enjoy the spectacular views and wilderness experience. For years, the county had tried to build public facilities for these hikers, but budget constraints and zoning issues had prevented any progress. The lack of restrooms had become a significant problem, with hikers often knocking on doors asking to use private bathrooms or, worse, ducking into the woods. The HOA had been reasonable under the previous leadership, a retired judge named Howard who believed in minimal interference in residents' lives. Monthly fees were reasonable, and rules were enforced with common sense rather than iron fists. Everything changed when Margaret Thornhill was elected HOA president last year. A former corporate executive with clear political ambitions, Margaret campaigned on modernizing community standards and increasing property values through strategic improvements. What she didn't mention in her glossy campaign materials was her husband's ownership of the 3 largest restaurants along the hiking trail access road. Within months of taking office, Margaret formed what she called the Community Enhancement Committee, which held meetings at odd hours when most working residents couldn't attend. There were whispers about her private meetings with local business owners who profited from the hikers, but nothing concrete emerged until it was too late. The first sign of trouble came when I received the HOA newsletter announcing a generous donation of $250, 000 to the association from the local business association for community improvements. The newsletter was vague about how this money would be spent, mentioning only infrastructure enhancements to support our community's unique character and appeal. At the quarterly meeting, several of us asked for specifics. Margaret assured everyone that all projects would comply with HOA bylaws and enhance property values. When I pressed for details, she smiled tightly and said the board was exploring multiple options and would communicate appropriately when decisions were finalized. I should have been more suspicious, but I was planning a 2-week visit to my daughter's new home in Arizona to help with her newborn twins. Before leaving, I noticed surveyors on the edge of my property, but when I questioned them, they claimed to be working for the county on a routine boundary verification. Another lie in what would prove to be an elaborate deception orchestrated right under my nose. The moment I turned onto my street after my 2-week absence, I knew something was wrong. Cars were parked along the curb near my property, something I'd never seen before. As I approached my driveway, my heart nearly stopped. There, on the corner of my land, stood a brick building with a curved roof and a large sign reading HOA Restrooms. I slammed on my brakes, convinced I must be hallucinating from the long drive. But the structure was undeniably real. A roughly 400-square-foot brick building with multiple doors, situated exactly where my prized Japanese maple collection had been planted. The trees were gone, replaced by a gravel walkway leading to the facility's entrance. Even more shocking was the activity around it. People, complete strangers with hiking gear, were casually walking in and out of the restrooms. Some were filling water bottles at a fountain installed on the side. Others were sitting on newly placed benches, adjusting their boots or checking trail maps. I parked haphazardly in my driveway and rushed toward the building, rage building with each step. A middle-aged couple exiting the facility smiled at me. "Are you with the HOA?" the woman asked. "We wanted to thank someone for finally providing decent facilities here. It makes such a difference for trail access." "This is my property," I stammered, too shocked to form coherent sentences. "I didn't authorize this." They looked confused, then uncomfortable, and quickly walked away toward the trail. A quick inspection confirmed my worst fears. The building wasn't some temporary structure. It was permanent, with plumbing, electricity, and even air conditioning units mounted on the rear wall. Inside were 4 toilet stalls, 2 urinals, sinks with hand dryers, and a water fountain. The construction was complete, right down to the courtesy of Oakridge Estates HOA, plaques mounted beside each mirror. I immediately called Margaret Thornhill, but my call went to voicemail. I then tried the HOA office and was told by the receptionist that all inquiries regarding the new community facilities should be directed to the board via email. When I identified myself and explained that the facility was on my property, she simply repeated her statement and ended the call. Shaking with anger, I explored the area further and discovered a small rack near the trail entrance filled with glossy brochures. The material advertised Eagle Ridge Trail with photos of the scenic views and prominently featured the convenient trail facilities with pictures of my property. According to the printing date, these had been produced weeks before construction even began. Most devastating was the condition of my land. The careful landscaping I'd spent thousands on was mostly destroyed. The water feature I'd installed now served as a backdrop for the restroom's rear wall. My privacy fence had been removed entirely on one side to create better access from the trail. As I stood there in disbelief, a county parks department truck pulled up. The driver nodded to me as he unlocked a newly installed garbage container next to the restroom. "How long has this been here?" I asked him. "Just finished it last week," he replied. "Record time, too. The HOA got all the approvals pushed through in a single day. Never seen anything move that fast through county bureaucracy." When he left, I noticed a small sign by the water fountain with operating hours, 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. daily. According to the sign, the facilities were maintained through a community partnership between Oakridge Estates HOA and the County Parks Department. It was becoming clear that this had been a carefully orchestrated plan, deliberately executed while I was away. But why my property? And how had they managed to build an entire facility in less than 2 weeks? I spent the next day investigating rather than confronting the HOA directly. A friend at the county records office helped me access documents that revealed the disturbing truth behind the restroom project. First, I discovered that Margaret Thornhill's husband didn't just own restaurants near the trail. He owned the 3 largest establishments that catered specifically to hikers: Ridgeview Cafe, Trailhead Brewery, and Summit Snacks. All 3 businesses had struggled with low weekday attendance until recently. The tourism board minutes from their last meeting told the real story. Trail usage had increased by 60% since the restroom construction began, with a corresponding increase in business for all establishments along the trail access road. The minutes specifically credited the new convenient facilities for making the trail more accessible to day trippers and families. Most shocking was finding the business association's agreement with the HOA, a contract stipulating a $5,000 monthly payment to Oakridge Estates for restroom maintenance and upkeep. This wasn't just a community improvement, it was a profit-generating enterprise. I also found the HOA's colorful brochure describing my corner lot as the community's contribution to local tourism enhancement. As if my private property were a communal asset they could repurpose at will. The county property records revealed why they had targeted my land specifically. Its corner location provided ideal access from both the trail and the main road, with existing water and sewer lines nearby for easy connection. An internal HOA memo described it as the perfect location for maximum utilization with minimal infrastructure investment. But the most infuriating discovery was an email chain between Margaret and the construction company, dated the day after I left for Arizona. "Property owner departed this morning for a 2-week absence," she wrote. "Expedite all work to ensure completion before his return." They had deliberately waited until I was gone to begin and complete construction, hoping to present me with a fait accompli that would be too costly and complicated to undo. And in the meantime, local businesses, including Margaret's husband's restaurants, were profiting handsomely from the arrangement, while I was left with strangers traipsing across my property at all hours. The next morning, I arrived at my property to find Margaret Thornhill herself standing outside the restroom facility, clipboard in hand, surrounded by several men in business suits. A banner reading "Grand Opening, Oakridge Eagle Ridge Partnership" was strung between two newly installed lampposts, on my property, of course. As I approached, I heard Margaret explaining to the assembled group how the community initiative would enhance property values while providing essential services to visitors. A photographer was taking pictures of the businessmen shaking hands in front of the facility. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I demanded, my voice echoing across the gathering. This was exactly the scene depicted in the thumbnail. Me, red-faced and furious, confronting a cool, collected Margaret with her clipboard. The group turned in surprise. Margaret's expression shifted almost imperceptibly before she forced a smile. "Robert, welcome home," she said smoothly. "We're just celebrating the completion of our new community amenity. Perhaps you'd like to say a few words as the hosting property owner." "Hosting property owner?" I sputtered, incredulous. "I never agreed to host anything. You built this public toilet on my land without permission." The businessmen looked uncomfortable. One whispered something to another. Meanwhile, hikers continued to stream in and out of the restroom, some casting curious glances at our confrontation, but most just going about their business, as if this facility had always been there. "Now, Robert," Margaret said in a patronizing tone, "the HOA has easement rights for community improvements. This is all perfectly legal and documented. We sent multiple notices about the project." "I never received any notices," I said, "and no easement gives you the right to build an entire structure on my property." She sighed as if dealing with a difficult child. The board voted unanimously. "This improvement adds value to the entire community, including your property. The increased foot traffic is good for local businesses, which improves the overall economic health of our neighborhood." A man in an expensive suit stepped forward. "I'm Richard Thornhill, chair of the Business Association. We're very appreciative of the community's contribution to local tourism. These facilities were desperately needed." So this was Margaret's husband, the restaurant owner who stood to profit most from this arrangement. I noticed he was wearing a Trailhead Brewery pin on his lapel. "I don't care what the board voted," I said. "This is my property. You had no right." "Actually, we had every right," Margaret interrupted, handing me a document from her clipboard. "This is the HOA covenant you signed when purchasing your property. Section 8, Paragraph 3 grants the association rights to install utilities and community facilities as needed. And this," she added, handing me another paper, "is the special assessment notice for your contribution to facility maintenance costs." I looked down at the paper in disbelief. It was a notice charging me $200 monthly for proportional maintenance costs of the very facility that had been built on my land without permission. "This is outrageous," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "You expect me to pay for maintaining a public restroom I never agreed to have on my property?" "The assessment applies to all Oakridge homeowners," she replied coolly. "Now, if you'll excuse us, we're in the middle of a ceremony." She turned back to the assembled business people as if dismissing me. A hiker pushed past me to enter the restroom, giving me an annoyed look as if I were blocking a public thoroughfare. I stood there, humiliated and furious, watching as they continued their celebration on my property, treating me like an unwelcome intruder on my own land. My initial attempts to fight back met with frustrating resistance at every turn. I filed a complaint with local authorities, only to have it dismissed when the HOA produced documents claiming to show I had approved the construction. The signatures were clearly forged, but proving that would require expensive forensic analysis and legal proceedings. I approached several neighbors hoping to rally support, but discovered the HOA had been strategic there too. Homeowners near the trail had received reductions in their monthly fees as compensation for increased traffic, while those farther away were told the facility would increase everyone's property values. Few wanted to rock the boat when they seemed to be benefiting from the arrangement. The physical impact on my daily life was immediate and severe. Cars frequently blocked my driveway as hikers used the restrooms. Early morning maintenance crews woke me with their noisy equipment. Privacy became a distant memory, with strangers constantly visible from my windows. A real estate agent friend gave me the worst news. A comparable corner property in our community had recently sold for 40% less than expected, specifically because potential buyers were concerned about the lack of privacy and constant public traffic. My property value was tanking while local businesses flourished. Margaret's husband's restaurants were now advertising their proximity to convenient facilities on all their promotional materials. Weekend revenue at Trailhead Brewery had reportedly doubled since the Restroom opened. To add insult to injury, I received a violation notice from the HOA citing my unmaintained landscaping, referring to the very areas they had destroyed during construction. The notice threatened fines if I didn't restore the plantings within 30 days, at my own expense. Each setback fueled my growing fury at the corruption and blatant targeting. I was being steamrolled by people who clearly thought I would eventually give up and accept their fait accompli. They had no idea who they were dealing with or what resources I had at my disposal. That night, as I watched yet another group of hikers use my restroom facilities, I made a decision. If they wanted to build on my property, I would make sure they'd regret it. It was time to put my 30 years of professional experience to work. The next day, I waited until the maintenance crew left at 10 a.m., then grabbed my professional inspection kit from the garage. After 3 decades as a health inspector, I knew exactly what to look for, and I suspected a facility built in less than 2 weeks would have cut significant corners. I was right. My systematic examination of the restroom facility revealed a shocking catalog of violations that would have never passed an official inspection. Whoever had expedited this project had bypassed virtually every safety protocol in the book. First, I discovered the sewage system was improperly connected to residential lines rather than the required commercial-grade infrastructure. This alone violated at least 6 county regulations and created a significant backup risk for nearby homes. The water supply connections were equally troubling. Instead of installing proper commercial lines, they had simply tapped into my residential water system, explaining why my water pressure had dropped significantly. This cross-connection without proper backflow prevention created a serious contamination risk. I took water samples from various outlets and tested them using my field kit. The results showed concerning levels of bacteria already present in the system, likely due to improper pipe installation. More alarming were the chemical levels indicating runoff from improperly sealed fixtures was seeping into surrounding soil. The ventilation system was woefully inadequate for a commercial facility, creating not just odor issues but potential buildup of harmful gases. Electrical installations violated code in multiple places, with improperly shielded connections in damp areas creating fire and shock hazards. I documented everything meticulously, taking photographs, collecting samples, measuring clearances, and noting every violation. By mid-afternoon, I had identified 37 distinct health and safety violations, at least 15 of which would individually qualify as critical under official inspection standards. Most damning was evidence of how corners had been cut to complete construction so quickly. I found building materials receipts in an unsecured maintenance closet showing everything had been ordered with emergency premiums paid for immediate delivery. The construction had been completed in just 10 days by working round the clock, explaining the exhausted condition of the finished project. I also discovered the facility was already experiencing structural issues. The hasty foundation work had resulted in uneven settling, creating cracks in 2 corners. Water was seeping into the walls during heavy usage, which would eventually create dangerous mold conditions. As tourists continued to stream in and out, I expanded my investigation to the surrounding area. Soil samples from my adjacent flower beds showed contamination from improper drainage. The ground around the septic connection was already showing signs of seepage. Most critically, I found evidence that the facility's waste was being improperly treated before entering the residential sewer system. This could potentially affect water quality throughout the neighborhood, a serious public health concern that would require immediate action under city regulations. By evening, I had assembled a comprehensive dossier documenting violations that could result in hundreds of thousands of dollars in fines and mandatory remediation costs. But rather than immediately reporting my findings, I decided to wait for the perfect moment to reveal what I knew, a moment when Margaret Thornhill and her business associates would be unable to bury my complaints. That opportunity would come sooner than expected. 3 days later, the HOA hosted a community partnership celebration at the neighborhood clubhouse. The event had been heavily promoted, with special invitations to local business owners, tourism officials, and county representatives. The agenda included a presentation on the successful Restroom initiative and plans for future projects. I arrived early, professional portfolio in hand, and took a seat in the front row. Margaret nodded stiffly when she saw me but quickly returned to preparing her presentation. The room filled with neighborhood residents, business owners, and several people with county government badges. After some opening remarks and refreshments, Margaret took the podium, her clipboard ever present in her hand. As you know, Oakridge Estates has embarked on an innovative community partnership that serves both our residents and the broader community. She began, clicking to a PowerPoint slide showing the restroom facility on my property, with smiling hikers outside. In just the first month of operation, we've seen a 70% increase in trail usage and corresponding growth in business revenue throughout our commercial district. She detailed the careful planning process and thorough execution, emphasizing how quickly the project had been completed under budget and ahead of schedule. The business owners in attendance nodded approvingly as she cited statistics about increased customer traffic at local establishments. We're now exploring Phase 2 of our Community Enhancement Initiative, Margaret continued, showing a map with several other locations marked for potential development. I recognized at least 3 other private properties that had been targeted for future facilities. When she finally opened the floor for questions, I raised my hand immediately. Margaret hesitated visibly before acknowledging me with a tight smile. Yes, Robert? A question about our successful initiative. I walked calmly to the front of the room, carrying my portfolio. Standing beside her at the podium, I smiled at the assembled crowd. Before asking my question, I should probably introduce myself properly, I said, reaching into my jacket pocket. Many of you know me as Robert Johnson, the homeowner whose property now features the new restroom facility. I withdrew my official identification badge and held it up for everyone to see. What you may not know is that I'm also Senior Health Inspector for the City Health Department, with 30 years of experience in commercial and public facilities inspection. The room went completely silent. Margaret's clipboard slipped from her fingers and clattered to the floor, the exact moment captured in the thumbnail image. Her face drained of color as I opened my portfolio and began laying out photographs of violations on the podium. And I have some concerns about this successful initiative that I'd like to share with everyone here today. This is inappropriate, Margaret sputtered, trying to gather the photographs I was arranging on the display table. This is clearly a conflict of interest. You can't use your position for a personal vendetta. I remained perfectly calm, continuing to display my evidence methodically. There's no vendetta here, Margaret. Just documentation of 37 distinct health and safety violations I discovered during my preliminary assessment. As a private citizen concerned about public health, I have every right to bring these issues to light. The business owners had rushed forward, examining the photos with growing alarm. Richard Thornhill's face had turned ashen as he studied a picture showing the improper sewage connections. These are serious allegations, said a woman with a county government badge, but without official. I've already filed the official reports, I interrupted, pulling out copies. A full inspection team will be on site tomorrow morning. But I thought everyone here deserved to know exactly what's been built in our community. I projected my most disturbing findings onto the screen, replacing Margaret's celebratory slideshow. This water testing shows contamination levels already exceeding safety standards. This affects not just facility users, but potentially the entire neighborhood's water supply. Gasps rippled through the audience as I explained the implications. Homeowners exchanged worried glances. Several pulled out phones and began taking pictures of my evidence. This facility must be shut down immediately, said the county representative, now fully engaged. Until a complete inspection. You can't do that, Richard Thornhill interjected. Do you know how much business we'll lose if you're more concerned about business than public safety? I replied evenly. That's precisely the problem with how this project was conceived and executed. Margaret made one final desperate attempt to regain control. The HOA has all necessary permits and approvals, obtained through misrepresentation, I countered, revealing the falsified documents. I've already spoken with the permit office. They're very interested in how approvals were rushed through without proper inspections. As if on cue, 2 uniformed health department officials entered the room. I had called them before the meeting, knowing this confrontation would require official backup. The facility is being closed effective immediately, announced the senior officer. By order of the city health department. Margaret's carefully orchestrated celebration had just become her worst nightmare. By noon the next day, my property had been transformed from a tourist convenience to a quarantine zone. Yellow caution tape surrounded the restroom facility, with large closed by order of health department notices plastered on every door. 2 news vans were parked across the street, reporters filming as disappointed hikers approached the closure notices. The official inspection team had arrived at 8 a.m. sharp, conducting a thorough examination that confirmed every violation I had documented and uncovered several more. The lead inspector's face had grown increasingly grim as the assessment proceeded. In my 20 years with the department, I've never seen so many critical violations in a single facility, he told the assembled news crews. The contamination risks alone warrant immediate closure, but the structural issues make this building potentially dangerous to occupy. Neighbors gathered at the perimeter, many learning for the first time about the health risks potentially affecting their homes. When soil testing revealed contaminants had already seeped into adjacent properties, the mood shifted from curiosity to anger. By mid-afternoon, the HOA's insurance company had arrived, accompanied by their attorneys. After reviewing the situation, the lead attorney made a call and then delivered devastating news to Margaret. The insurance would not cover any damages or remediation costs because the permits had been obtained fraudulently and required inspections had been skipped. The county commissioners called an emergency session, distancing themselves from the project and launching an investigation into how approvals had been fast-tracked without proper oversight. Tourism officials removed all mentions of the facility from their promotional materials. Most significantly, a class action lawsuit was already being organized by homeowners potentially affected by the contamination. Their attorney held an impromptu press conference at the edge of my property. This represents a catastrophic failure of HOA governance and potentially criminal negligence, she announced. The affected homeowners will seek full remediation and substantial damages. As Margaret Thornhill was leaving the site after being questioned by county officials, a process server intercepted her with multiple legal notices. I watched from my porch as she accepted the thick stack of documents, her carefully constructed facade finally crumbling. The restroom that was supposed to bring tourists and profits had instead brought health hazards, legal liability, and the complete collapse of her ambitious plans. The community center was standing room only for the emergency meeting called 2 days later. Homeowners who had never attended an HOA meeting before crowded in, demanding answers. The HOA board sat at a long table facing the audience, with Margaret conspicuously absent, on medical leave, according to the vice president who struggled to maintain order. The meeting quickly became a forum for revelations as homeowners shared information they had uncovered. A retired accountant had analyzed the HOA financial records and discovered that board members had received consulting fees from the business association, essentially kickbacks for approving the restroom project. A real estate agent presented data showing that contrary to Margaret's claims, property values throughout the neighborhood had actually decreased due to the commercial traffic and association with public facilities. Homes nearest to the trail access had lost nearly 15% of their value in recent appraisals. Most disturbing were the testimonies from other residents who discovered their properties had been altered without permission. One elderly couple found surveyor stakes mysteriously moved 10 feet onto their land. Another homeowner discovered plans designating his side yard as a future parking area expansion. When the HOA attorney attempted to minimize the issues as procedural oversights, the audience erupted in angry shouts. The atmosphere grew even more heated when someone projected images of Phase 2, plans showing additional facilities planned throughout the neighborhood, all on private properties with good access to the trail system. At the height of the tension, I asked for the floor. The room quieted as I walked to the podium. "I've lived here for 3 years," I began, "and until now I've kept mostly to myself. That was my mistake. When we don't pay attention to how our community is governed, we invite abuse of power." I explained how the Restroom project exemplified a fundamental betrayal of trust and property rights, core values that resonated deeply with my neighbors. "This isn't just about a building on my land," I concluded. "It's about whether we control our own properties or surrender them to whoever has the most power in the moment." The meeting ended with a unanimous vote to remove the entire board and elect an interim leadership committee until formal elections could be held. The era of Margaret Thornhill's unchecked authority was officially over. The county courthouse was packed for the initial hearing on what local media had dubbed Restroomgate. 3 separate legal actions had been consolidated: my property rights case, the class action from affected homeowners, and the county's regulatory enforcement proceedings. Judge Eleanor Martinez, known for her no-nonsense approach to property law, presided over the hearing. As evidence was presented, including the falsified documents, environmental test results, and financial records showing the conflicts of interest, her expression grew increasingly severe. Margaret Thornhill, now represented by her own attorney separate from the HOA counsel, appeared haggard and defensive on the witness stand. When confronted with evidence of her direct involvement in falsifying permits, she finally broke down. "We thought it would be easier to ask forgiveness than permission," she admitted under oath. "The location was perfect, and we didn't think Mr. Johnson would fight it once it was completed." The judge's ruling was comprehensive and unequivocal. The HOA was ordered to remove the facility entirely and restore my property to its original condition at their expense. Additional damages were awarded that more than compensated for my lost property value and distress. Most significantly, the judge referred the case to the district attorney's office for potential criminal charges of fraud, environmental violations, and conspiracy against former board members and their business associates. "This court will not tolerate such flagrant disregard for property rights and public health," Judge Martinez declared, bringing her gavel down with finality. Over the next 3 weeks, my property underwent a remarkable transformation. The restoration team, working under court supervision, didn't just remove the offending structure, they enhanced the land beyond its original condition. Where the restroom had stood, skilled landscapers installed a water feature surrounded by native plants. The damaged soil was completely replaced with rich topsoil that would support the new Japanese maple collection I had selected, varieties even more spectacular than those destroyed during construction. The fence was rebuilt with upgraded materials, creating better privacy while maintaining the aesthetic appeal of the neighborhood. Drainage issues that had existed before the whole ordeal were corrected as part of the comprehensive remediation. My status in the community had transformed completely. From being viewed as the difficult complainer, I was now sought out for advice on HOA governance and property rights issues. I helped draft new bylaws that required homeowner approval for any projects affecting private property and established transparent processes for all HOA decisions. As part of her community service sentence, Margaret Thornhill was assigned to the county's trail maintenance program. There was a certain poetic justice in seeing her picking up trash along the edges of my newly restored property, with hikers now directed to properly built facilities on land actually owned by the county. The restrooms that had been meant to exploit my land had instead led to a stronger, more vigilant community where homeowners' rights were finally respected. They built a public restroom on my land to profit from tourism, thinking I was just another homeowner they could bully into submission. Instead, they found themselves face-to-face with the one person who could shut down their entire operation with a single inspection. Sometimes justice doesn't require a long fight, just the right expertise at the exact right moment. Before you try to steal someone's property for your own profit, you better make damn sure you know who you're dealing with.